Never have we ever
made a video answering the question,
am I ready to have sex?
Until today.
So we're getting into that. This video was inspired by Devi and Paxton from Never Have I Ever.
Season 3, Episode 1. Let's get into it.
On this channel, we talk all things relationships for teens and young adults.
And we even get into those questions that you're a little too nervous or uncomfortable to ask people.
Hence the intro to this video, okay? And we love to tie in some pop culture references as well. So if you're interested, definitely subscribe, like this video, do all the things.
This video does contain some spoiler alerts. So if you're into Never Have I Ever, go ahead and put this video on your watch for later. Go watch the first episode of Season 3. But even if you're not into Never Have I Ever, which, why would you not be?
Honestly, it's a great show.
But even if you're not, this is still going to be relevant advice for teens and young adults.
We're going to start off by diving into that whole episode, kind of summing up some of the conversations Devi had with her friends, her cousin, and Paxton. And we're just going to break down things that she did right and parts of that conversation that were actually kind of missing. Because there were some really great, actual practical, good advice in that episode, but we were missing some things too. So we're going to fill in the gaps for you.
So let's start with the things that Devi did right. Before she actually made her decision on whether or not she was going to have sex with Paxton, she went to her closest friends and kind of asked how they felt about it.
And honestly, that conversation was kind of interesting because at first her friends were just super supportive, oh my gosh, we're so happy for you, just go for it. But then Devi kind of had this moment where she started being honest, and she kind of said how well, I've wanted to have sex with Paxton for a while, but, quote, kissing to intercourse in 2 weeks, isn't that kind of fast? So that was the first time we actually saw Devi take a step back and be honest about what she was feeling.
Which kind of opened the door for her friends to start processing how she's actually feeling with her.
Exactly. So then that actually led to her friend Anissa opening up a little bit about her relationship with Ben. And she said, so don't have sex with him. I'm not having sex with Ben. So that probably relieved some of the pressure for Devi just to realize not all of her friends were having sex anyway.
Right, exactly. And then Fabiola said, Devi, you don't have to if you aren't ready. Which I think was really what Devi needed to hear right then.
Yes, because as soon as Fabiola said that, then Devi went into how she was actually kind of feeling pressure from the mean girls at her school and some of the comments that they made.
Right, they literally said, he's not going to stay with you if you're not having sex with him.
So that's when we start to realize that all of this crisis, do I have sex with him, do I not, stems from these people that don't even know Devi, talking about her relationship and making her feel like she had to have sex with Paxton. But even after her friends kind of affirming girl, you don't need to do this, you're obviously getting pressure from people instead of making this decision about yourself. Unfortunately, Devi then just went back to, well, I do want to have sex with him, so I'm going to go for it. And then her friends, Eleanor, was yes, queen. And that was kind of the end of the friend conversation.
But all of that did actually lead Devi into talking to her older cousin.
A trusted adult, Kamala. We love her character.
Right, about all of this. And Kamala actually gave some really great advice. So we're just going to read it.
Okay, so Kamala said, sex is a big deal. When you sleep with someone, you're the most vulnerable you'll ever be. And if you rush into that, you could get really hurt, emotionally. I've learned the hard way that you shouldn't do anything on anyone's schedule but your own. And you shouldn't have sex yet, unless you're ready. So Kamala points out a lot of great things just about how you're being emotionally invested. And that's actually something that Devi's friends didn't point out at all. So I think that really was just some wisdom from someone older that's been through similar experiences before. So that's why talking to a trusted adult is great when it comes to these kind of things.
So Kamala ended with the advice, unless you're ready, which her friends also kind of said that to Devi as well. But the problem is Devi doesn't really know if she's ready. And I think the narrator kind of put it pretty well. He said, the problem was Devi, like most teenagers, had no idea what she was ready for. All she knew was that she certainly was not ready to get dumped.
Okay, so I think this is really important to break down though, because I feel a lot of teenagers and young adults like me, myself, I also kind of struggle sometimes figuring out what I want and separating that from what other people expect of me or what I feel is expected of me. Although I do think it is super valuable for Devi and any teenagers to take the time to figure out what they really do want, I think it's even more valuable to actually assess whether a situation is good for you or healthy or if it's risky. So we feel that part of the conversation was just missing from both with their friends and with Kamala. So we kind of want to break that down next.
So to clarify, sometimes what we want versus what is actually good for us is not necessarily the same thing.
Exactly. So let's be real for a second here. When we're talking about sex, there are some very real risks that you need to consider. And Devi didn't actually consider any of those realistic things in her conversations with her friends or with Kamala. So let's break that down real quick. STDs, STIs, sexually transmitted infections. It is known that Paxton has had multiple previous sexual partners, and so it's actually pretty likely that he might have an STD. Little statistic for you guys. 15 to 24-year-olds account for half of all the new STIs in the United States. Kind of wild. So that's a very realistic possibility that, like, if Paxton was a real person, he would probably potentially have an STD. So definitely that should have been a conversation. They would need to talk about that and like get tested and stuff like that. And then obviously pregnancy would be a concern as well. That wasn't mentioned at all in their conversations, should probably be mentioned at some point.
So at this point, Devi and Paxton have only been dating for 2 weeks, and they're already considering going to the highest level of physical intimacy that you can.
But I think we can all agree that in 2 weeks, they probably have not gotten to like the highest level of emotional intimacy and vulnerability. And unfortunately, whenever those two levels don't match up, like specifically when the physical intimacy is as far as possible, but your emotional vulnerability and intimacy is down here, that leaves a lot of room for like insecurity, not really trusting each other. It also gives this false sense of being way more connected than you actually are. Because you physically connected, it feels like you're really, really in it together, but that like emotional stuff has not been established yet. So definitely that leaves room for a lot of like hurt feelings down the road if the relationship doesn't last. Spoiler alert, they do break up. So if they had decided to have sex, then that would have thrown in a lot more issues because of that imbalance.
So even after all of that, her conversations with her friends, her conversation with Kamala, Devi does decide to have sex with Paxton. So let's fast forward to the moment where they're actually in it.
So basically they're hanging out, they've been making out for a hot minute, and they're about to do the thing, okay? And basically Paxton realizes that Devi is super tense, and so he stops. And that finally opens the door for Devi to actually talk to Paxton about it. And so she says, I don't think I'm ready to have sex. I understand if you want to break up with me. I know you don't date girls who don't put out, so that's cool. And then, of course, Paxton was like, that's not true. I can go slow. And then Devi says, what does going slow mean to you? And then Paxton, because he's a good guy now, he says, look, Devi, I only want to do what you're comfortable with.
So it actually becomes clear that Devi was not even feeling this pressure from Paxton at all. It was really from these outside sources. But once they finally were able to like clear the air and get things out in the open, they decided to just do what they were comfortable with.
So overall, that was a good conversation. The way they both handled it was good. But if Devi was really being mature, then she would have had that conversation sooner with Paxton. They never had a conversation about boundaries at all. So definitely Devi should have just brought up that conversation before they were even in the heat of the moment so that they could make sure they were on the same page.
So Kayla and I are actually really big fans of this show, but we really did feel like this episode was very relevant to the sort of pressure that teens and young adults do feel around sex. It's really hard to silence those other sort of outside opinions that you're feeling and decide what's actually best for you and what you're comfortable with.
With that being said, maybe watching this video has actually made you realize that some decisions you've made in the past were based on peer pressure or other people's expectations. So if you have had sex before and you're realizing that for yourself, that actually wasn't a choice that you wanted to make, then we just want to encourage you that it is not too late to kind of switch gears and start making choices that are best for you and your future you, and just standing up for yourself. We believe in you. You can make that happen. And then on the other end of that, maybe you're a teenager who's really not even interested in relationships or sex right now. That is completely normal and fine too. We do not want you to feel like, well, since they're making videos about this, that must mean that this is just completely normal and expected of me. That's actually like the opposite of what we're trying to say here. So if you don't really relate to this video now, that's okay. You might relate to it a little bit more in the future, so kind of keep this information in your back pocket.
So let us know in the comments if there's any other movies or TV shows that you might want us to cover, and don't be afraid to get specific episodes, characters. We want to know.
Also be on the lookout for future videos. We're going to be posting a video about homecoming dance stuff, and then also a video talking about boundaries, like other types of boundaries, not just physical. So those will be coming out in the next couple months, so definitely check back in. But until then,
like and subscribe.
And we'll see you later.